Welcome back to Insight. We are talking to Dr. Richard McLaren, the man who wrote the report on behalf of the World Anti-Doping Agency on doping at the Olympics by the Russians. President Putin, in his year-end address, now this is since you released your report,
yes,
has said no international conspiracy, and he suggested that Rodchenkov, who is the man who ran the doping the lab in Sochi and then defected to the United States, he suggested that he was a puppet with strings being pulled by some other foreign source. Is this, again, kind of this pattern of a dodge by the Russians at all levels, that this happened outside the country and had nothing to do with us?
There's no evidence whatsoever that establishes that point. Rodchenkov was operating within a system where others were also involved, and there was a direct series of links to the deputy minister in sport.
All right. Right now, WADA is the hero. Using your expertise, they have come out and put the evidence out here. But, you know, if we go back to 2010, as early as 2010, an employee, Vitaly Mutko, of the doping agency in Russia, was sending 200 emails, 50 letters to WADA saying that there was a systematic doping of athletes, and WADA didn't act. Do you hold some criticism for the organization of which you've worked for?
Well, I didn't really work for the organization. I was appointed as an independent person and was then given free rein to do what I thought was the appropriate things to do in an investigation. But I think any organization has a problem dealing with information that comes from whistleblowers. And WADA at that stage in its development, because it's a relatively young organization, it was 10 or 12 years old at that point in 2010, just didn't know how to process and handle the information.
Are you critical of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, for not taking this more seriously to begin with, and even pre-Rio declined to ban athletes and put it out to individual sports or organizations?
Well, I was asked to write a report about what went on at Sochi, and I conducted an investigation. I wrote the report about what went on in Sochi and all the other things that were going on that I could identify that were tied to it. And the whole purpose of my work was to provide the factual basis for others to make decisions. The IOC made a decision based on the facts that I presented in July, which was different than the International Paralympic Committee made a decision on the same facts.
Were you disappointed?
I was somewhat disappointed, yes, but that's up to them to determine. It wasn't for me.
Tell me what happens now. Your report has come out. It's shocked many. For others, it has probably solidified what they thought all along. What happens now? We have the spectacle of athletes being stripped of medals, and is that the end of it?
I don't think so. Certainly athletes will be stripped of medals and will suffer various other sanctions through their federations. But the Russians have been, the system has been caught out and described. They're in the process of trying to reform what they're doing. And I think there are other countries that may have similar sets of circumstances operating. They've got to be taking notice that they also better start to think about how they're going to change what's going on internally in their own countries.
So there is some legitimate criticism by Russia that why us? There are a lot of other countries doing this.
I wouldn't say there are a lot, but there certainly seems to be some others. So that was not part of my investigation, so that's my own personal assessment.
What about Vitaly Mutko, the former sports minister and now the deputy prime minister? We spoke about him earlier. Is he now going to be subject to a review by the International Olympic Committee? Could he be banned from future games, or what action could be taken against him?
Well, the IOC set up a disciplinary commission, which is headed by a former politician from Switzerland, who is on the ethics commission of the IOC, and they're in the process of looking into what went on with respect to a number of people that are named in the report, including Minister Mutko, and they'll receive some of the evidence that we have in the independent investigation, and then they'll make a decision about what they're going to do. And they already, in his case, they did ban him from being in the Rio Games.
He was banned from Rio. What could happen in the future? What are the options? Because there's a jurisdiction issue. How do you take action against another government sports minister?
Right. I don't think you can do anything other than say, I run the party, I'm the IOC, you're not invited. And I think they can exclude anybody they want from being there, as they did. But they want to have some basis for doing so, so that's why they're looking at the information that we have with respect to the people named in the report.
The next party, as you say, is the next Olympics. Should Russia be allowed to participate, do you think?
That's not for me to comment on. I think that's a complicated question that involves considering a lot of things more than just what's going on in the doping system within the country.
In what sense?
I think there's a lot of relationships between international federations, the domestic organizers of the games, in this case in South Korea where the next Winter Games are. A lot of factors to consider that are as important as the doping aspect.
Do you believe that Russia is cleaning up now its system and has the will to do it?
From my experience with having the opportunity to have conversations with senior Russian government officials, I think they have the will, I think they have the desire. They want to come back and be in the tent. They want to join the international sporting community and stand upright the same as everybody else in the world. And they are taking steps. The problem that they have is you can change the law, it doesn't mean that you change the behavior of people. And how's the on-the-ground culture going to change? And that's going to take more than just to change the law. That's going to take a concerted effort, education and other activities to actually change conduct. And that takes years, not
Do you take
weeks.
a lot of these denials of state involvement, of people saying it's an outside geopolitical problem, it's not real? Surely that doesn't leave you reassured that they are coming to grips with what happened.
I don't think they'll ever say, admit what happened or acknowledge it, but they do implicitly, because nobody's criticized the information that's come out in the report. There's been no counter evidence by anybody, inside or outside of Russia, threatening or establishing that what I've done is not accurate. So they're effectively, tacitly admitting it by taking all these steps and changing. Every person that was mentioned in the first report in July has been fired that was involved in the Ministry of Sport. They all lost their jobs. That's an implicit admission that something was wrong.
Marion Jones, the American sprinter, went to jail for doping, but it was on the basis that she lied to a grand jury. Should doping be a criminal offense? I assume that's pretty hard to fathom.
I strongly think it should not be. I think that to do so, one would make the prosecution of athletes when they do commit offenses more difficult, considerably more complex legally, but more importantly, would push a lot of it more underground, and that means that organized crime and others would get more involved. I don't think it's a positive step to allow criminalization of the sport. But I know a number of countries have done so. France has had that, and Italy has those laws, and Germany's just put them in, and other countries are considering it.
I know you've been quoted as saying you want to clean this up for your grandchildren.
Right.
It seems like it's just gotten worse. I mean, I covered the Olympics starting back in 1992. I've done 5 games from Barcelona on with Richard Pound saying we'll out these people, we'll find them eventually. But the scale of it has grown. It doesn't seem it's diminished.
I think it has grown maybe from 10 years ago, but we're also getting a lot better at catching people, so it's being contained, but we're still not at the level that we probably should be. The WADA accredited labs around the world on average find about 0.5% to 1% of their samples positive that they test. Studies by sociologists and others suggest that somewhere around 25% to 30% of athletes are on some kind of prohibited substances.
25% to 30% of athletes cheating. Do you believe that?
I've looked at some of those studies, and I think that they've been done with proper inquiry and integrity. So I think that there is, yes, the exact percentage, I don't know that you could ever come up with that, but there's a percentage that's significant, that's over 20%.
That shocks me.
It is shocking, and trying to get at that, and then what's the disconnect between the WADA accredited labs having 0.5% to 1% of the samples they test being positive, and studies suggesting that there's a much higher level of use in sport? What's going on? That means there needs to be some adjustments in how we pursue prosecution of the problem.
If the public wasn't already skeptical about gold medals and winners and who was crossing the finish line in any kind of clean way, they are certainly deeply skeptical now of Olympic records. Somebody suggested, let's just throw them all away and start again. It's that bad.
Yes, I've read that too. Again, I don't know whether you should do that or not. I think that each sport would have to decide for themselves. And some sports have that problem with doping to a much greater extent than other sports. For example, athletics, cycling are two examples of sports that have had in the past real serious doping issues. And they may want to consider that, but that's way beyond the scope of what I was doing.
What about football? Soccer?
Football, soccer. We came across some evidence about football in the investigation within Russia, but it's a very minor part of the total picture in terms of the evidence that I have.
But you're worried about it. You feel that we're just not talking about Olympic sports.
Oh, no. We're talking about sports across the board, and I think we're also talking about professional sport.
We talked about the public watching people cross the finish line. When Richard McLaren watches the Olympics and other sports, do you feel just a lot of it's tainted?
You can't help but have some skepticism about what's going on. And my kids are always accusing me of thinking that you think everybody's a doper. I don't think everybody's a doper, but you certainly see events that suggest, is that really proper? Is that really a good result?
Sad.
Sad, absolutely.
Dr. Richard McLaren, pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
As for Russia, well, President Vladimir Putin has attacked the whistleblower whose revelations ignited the scandal. He says his country does have issues to address, but didn't create the problem of doping. Sport, he says, must be cleansed of all politics. The investigations continue. That's all for now. I'm Dana Lewis, and that was Insight.